I stepped outside, holding the leash in my hand, ready to take my dog for a walk and maybe squeeze in a quick run. As I watched my neighbors start their cars and head off to work, I couldn't help but let out a long sigh. It hit me again. I had no office to rush off to anymore. After the bankruptcy of my business, I was buried in debt and stuck in a routine of failure. Another day spent at home, trying and failing to resurrect my once thriving business. The weight of all these setbacks made me feel invisible, like I was standing still while the world around me moved forward without a second thought. I saw my neighbor James walking across his well-kept driveway. James ran a successful car import business and always seemed to have a different luxury car parked outside his house. Today was no exception. He strolled over with his usual confident smile plastered across his face. "Hey there," he called out with his usual cheer. Almost too much of it. I forced a smile and nodded, though his grin only seemed to grow wider. "Another easy day for you, huh?" I remarked, trying to keep things light. But his response stung. "Well, I've got cars to import," he said, chuckling, then turned to walk away. I watched him go, reminding myself not to let his smugness get to me. Some people just couldn't resist rubbing it in. Used to be, walking through the door into my home was the best part of my day. Now, it felt like stepping into a storm. Not because of the house itself, but because of who lived there. Laura, my wife, worked as an insurance agent. But ever since the business went under, she'd grown colder, distant. The difference was impossible to ignore. Gone were the days when she'd call me up, excited for an impromptu romantic dinner or a cozy movie night on the couch. Now, our conversations had become brief, mechanical, like we were just going through the motions. The house that once felt like a sanctuary was now a constant reminder of what we'd lost. I tried to reconnect, mentioning how she used to check in on me during the day, just to show she cared. But when I brought it up, Laura barely looked up from her papers, responding with a cold, "Things change." One evening, after another long day, I gathered the courage to approach her. I missed her, missed us, and I wanted to feel close again, like we used to. I gently brought up our first anniversary, remembering that magical candlelight dinner on the terrace, the dance under the stars. Laura glanced up from her laptop, her face unreadable. "What's the point of all this?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I just miss us," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I miss how things used to be." Laura sighed loudly, then shut her laptop. "I don't have time for this right now. I'm swamped with work," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Being home doesn't mean I'm free to sit around and reminisce. Her words hit me like a slap. I told her I just wanted to spend time with her, to be together like before. She looked at me with cold eyes, her voice hard as she reminded me that things had changed. She had responsibilities now, and I was just here. She said she didn't have time for sweet talk, and when she wasn't buried under work, we could talk about it. "Whenever you're ready," I muttered, feeling the painful distance between us in every syllable. The silence that followed as I turned to leave felt thicker than ever. Later, as I walked through the park with my dog, a small spark of optimism flickered in me. Sure, my business had collapsed, but that was just one setback. Life wasn't over. "It's just another challenge," I whispered to myself, patting my dog's head. "I'll rise again." When I got back home, I noticed Laura at the dressing table, carefully applying lipstick and makeup. Her reflection caught my eye, and for a moment, I remembered how she used to look when we were first in love, so full of life and confidence. I walked over, offering a soft smile. "You look beautiful," I said, hoping for some kind of response. But Laura didn't even glance at me. She just kept going with her makeup. A minute later, after she was finished, she admired herself in the mirror and smiled, saying, "I'm beautiful." Trying to make conversation, I casually asked what her work schedule looked like for the evening. She paused for a second, looking at me like I was asking something strange. "Around 7, I think," she replied. "Why?" I gave her a wink and said, "Oh, no reason. Just curious." But in my mind, I was planning something small, but meaningful. Tonight, I'd cook a homemade dinner for us, complete with her favorite wine. It wasn't much, but maybe it could help bridge the growing gap between us. Maybe, just maybe, it'd be the spark we needed to rebuild what we had. And if it worked, maybe it'd give me the push I needed to get my career back on track, too. I spent the day making our home feel bright and welcoming, playing upbeat music as I cleaned. Every dish washed and every surface polished made me feel a little better. It wasn't much, but it was something. After that, I headed to the grocery store to pick up the ingredients for dinner. On a whim, I decided to stop by the wine shop for a bottle of Laura's favorite. As I stepped inside, the familiar jingle of the doorbell sounded, and Pam, the saleswoman, greeted me with a big smile. "Well, it's been a while," she said, clearly excited to see me. I gave a half-smile in return. "Yeah, it's been a rough stretch, but I'm managing," I replied, keeping the truth behind my words. I asked Pam if they had a bottle of the rose wine, and she raised her eyebrows playfully, teasing me about planning a romantic evening at home. I chuckled, trying to sound casual, and said something like that. I mentioned that Laura had been in earlier, picking up a bottle of the same wine. Pam immediately seemed to realize she'd said too much and stammered, quickly offering an explanation. "Maybe Laura's planning her own surprise for you," she suggested, her voice uncertain. She cleared her throat and wrapped the bottle efficiently, clearly hoping to steer the conversation in a different direction. As I drove home, my initial optimism began to fade, replaced by a swirl of thoughts. Could Laura be planning a surprise for me too? But why would she have bought the wine so early in the day? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, a mixture of anticipation and doubt creeping in. I tried not to overthink it. I'd find out soon enough. When I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath to steady myself and tried to focus on the task at hand. The scent of the dinner I'd prepared filled the house, distracting me, if only for a moment, from the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. I glanced at the clock. It was already 7:45. Laura was usually punctual, but I told myself that work could have kept her longer. Maybe something came up. Still, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Sitting at the dining table, set for two, I kept checking my phone, hoping for a call or text. The house was eerily quiet, save for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Each second seemed to stretch, feeding my growing uncertainty. Finally, around 8:30, my phone rang. It was Laura. I picked up quickly. "Hey," I greeted her, trying to mask the concern in my voice. "I'm so sorry, James," she replied, her voice rushed and slightly breathless. "An unexpected business trip came up. I couldn't turn it down. My boss insisted." I tried to process the information. "Oh, okay. But can't you leave in the morning, or something?" "I'm already on my way there," she sighed, her tone apologetic. "It's a huge opportunity for me. You know, it could open doors." I took a slow breath. I wanted to be understanding, especially considering the mess my own life was in, but something didn't sit right. "I get it, but I wish you'd told me sooner." I know, she said, her voice still hurried. "Everything happened so fast. I really have to go, James." I glanced at the table I had so carefully set, at the meal I'd made for us, and felt a pang of disappointment. "All right, take care," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me when you can." There was a brief pause, and her voice softened. "Okay, I will. I'll be back soon. Well, maybe not too soon. I don't know how long it'll take. Maybe 2 weeks or so." 2 weeks? I felt my stomach drop as the call ended. I sank into the nearest chair, my mind racing. The sudden business trip made sense, but the earlier sight of her buying wine kept nagging at me. Was it just a coincidence? Maybe she really wanted to unwind during her trip and didn't mention it. But somehow, it didn't feel right. I let out a deep breath and forced myself to focus on the here and now. The dinner was still sitting there, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. I grabbed a plate, served myself some food, and moved to the living room. The soft glow of the TV filled the space, and I flipped on the game to distract myself. For a while, it worked. I got lost in the excitement of the game, an occasional chuckle escaping as I watched. When my glass ran dry, I headed to the kitchen for a refill. As I passed the study, I noticed an odd light. Something on the computer screen had caught my eye. It was on, which wasn't unusual, but the faint hum of notifications or a disturbed screen caught my attention. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside the study and switched on the overhead light, half expecting the computer to have been left on after someone had a few too many drinks. But just as I turned to leave, another sound from the computer made me stop dead in my tracks. A small pop-up appeared in the corner of the screen. Photos successfully synced. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated, then walked over to the computer, clicking the notification. The screen briefly showed a loading icon before revealing a list of files, timestamps from just a few hours ago. With trembling hands, I opened one of the files. The image started to load from top to bottom, and as it did, I recognized the face. Laura. The picture slowly revealed more of the scene, and my stomach twisted in knots. By the time the image fully loaded, my heart sank. There she was, my wife, sitting on her boss's lap, playfully taking a selfie. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I slumped into the nearest chair, my head in my hands. All the doubts and suspicions I'd pushed aside came rushing back, now confirmed by the undeniable evidence on the screen. The room felt like it was closing in on me as I stared at the image on the screen. Laura's eyes were playful, and the way she leaned into her boss, so comfortable, so familiar, told a story I wasn't ready to hear. The wine in my stomach churned uncomfortably, and I quickly clicked through more files. Another sequence of photos popped up, this time showing Laura and her boss at a high-end bar. In some pictures, they were laughing, raising glasses and toasts, and in others, they were deep in conversation, their faces alarmingly close. Each new image seemed to chip away at the last bits of denial I had left. Everything I'd done that evening, the dinner I'd put so much effort into, the hopeful feeling that maybe, just maybe, we could start again, now felt like a cruel joke. A painful mix of anger, humiliation, and disbelief flooded over me. But most of all, I felt hollow, like I was losing everything I'd once held dear. I stood up, leaving the wine bottle behind, no longer interested in it. I wanted something stronger, something to numb the ache. The light drizzle outside barely registered as I pulled on my coat and walked out the door. My feet carried me slowly toward the liquor store, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel myself unraveling, piece by piece. The memories of the good times, the ones that now seemed so distant, flashed through my mind, and with each one, the question why echoed louder and louder. Why had Laura pulled away? Was it because I couldn't provide like I used to? I remembered when my business was thriving, when we had big dreams together. I'd promised her the latest Mercedes, the symbol of success, but I never followed through. Could that unkept promise really be why she was slipping away? Or was it something deeper, something I couldn't see? Maybe it was a mix of things, a slow accumulation of ignored moments and words left unsaid. What was certain, though, was that everything had changed, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a relationship that no longer existed. I stumbled into the store, rain dripping down my face, soaking into my coat. Pam recognized me instantly, but the smile I'd forced on my face didn't fool her. She paused, searching for something kind to say. "Hey, James," she said softly. "Tough day." I barely whispered, "Whiskey, please." Pam's eyes softened with concern. "Are you sure? If you want to talk?" I shook my head, cutting her off. "Just the whiskey, please." She didn't argue. I took the bottle, gave her a half-hearted smile, and left the store without another word. But I didn't wait until I got home to crack open the whiskey. A few swigs in, and the world started spinning. The alcohol washed over me like a flood, stripping away any defenses I had left. I felt the words spilling out before I could stop them, speaking louder and louder to strangers passing by. "Hey," I shouted, pointing at no one in particular. "Do you know my wife? She's off somewhere, living it up with her boss, and here I am, celebrating." I laughed bitterly, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, a real one-man party. That's me." As time passed, my speech became more slurred, and I found myself singing bits of a song that had been playing earlier that evening, a song meant for a romantic dinner for two. My voice cracked and wavered, sometimes staying on key, other times completely off pitch. The sadness in my voice was unmistakable, each note mirroring the broken pieces of my heart. I was barely aware of my surroundings as I stumbled down the sidewalk, and soon I realized I had lost my whiskey bottle. Thinking I'd finished it, I turned back to the store for another. As I walked, my pockets were empty, no money. I reached inside, but it wasn't there. That's when I noticed the older man nearby. He watched me with a mix of concern and curiosity. I turned toward him, my words slurring as I raised my voice. "What? You got something to say?" The old man, wearing glasses and carrying a weathered backpack, seemed startled by my sudden aggression. But something about his gaze softened, as if he saw the brokenness behind the anger. I quickly dropped the confrontation and shifted gears. My voice cracked as I apologized. "I just need a drink. Please, can you spare $1? Just $1.20. The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed. With a slow, careful motion, he pulled a few crumpled bills from his shirt pocket and handed them to me. "It's all I have," he muttered. I took the money, unsteady on my feet, and mumbled a quick thanks. I asked him if he wanted to join me for a drink, but he declined gently, his face full of concern. I was about to argue when my stomach turned, and before I could stop it, I vomited right there on the pavement. The misty rain had soaked me to the bone, and the cold was starting to settle deep in my bones. I leaned against a brick wall, my eyes closed, trying to catch my breath. The old man watched me, worry etched in his face. He stepped closer, asking if I lived nearby. In a barely coherent mumble, I said I just wanted to sleep. He glanced around at the nearly deserted street, the dim lamplight casting long, eerie shadows on the wet pavement. "This isn't a good place to sleep. Not in this weather," he said, his voice gentle but firm. With surprising strength for his age, the old man helped me to my feet, taking most of my weight. He led me toward a nearby bridge, his hand steady on my shoulder. Below the bridge, hidden from the rain and prying eyes, was a makeshift shelter. Constructed from discarded materials and tarps, it offered little comfort but at least provided some warmth and dryness. The faint chirping of morning birds stirred me from my sleep, but my surroundings felt unfamiliar, like I had stumbled into someone else's dream. A dull haze clouded my vision, and a sharp throb pulsed through my skull, the result of last night's excesses. Groaning, I tried to piece together where I was. The dim light revealed a simple wooden shelter, and as I pushed aside the thin curtain and stepped outside, I squinted against the sunlight, attempting to orient myself. By the edge of a gentle river, an elderly man sat, casting his fishing line. His posture was relaxed, his hands steady, though they bore the marks of time. He turned to me with a knowing smile and remarked that it had taken me a while to wake up, adding that we might have had a bit too much fun the previous night. I blinked, taken aback by his warmth, then stammered, trying to piece together the hazy fragments of memory. I don't remember how I got here," I confessed. The man chuckled lightly, his deep voice a quiet rumble. "You had a little too much to drink last night, son. You passed out on the pavement, so I figured it wouldn't be right to leave you there. Brought you here to rest up." My cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry if I caused any trouble," I muttered, feeling the sting of my reckless behavior. Tom, the man introduced himself as, leaned back in his chair, his face creased with experience and wisdom. The sunlight caught his eyes, reflecting a lifetime of stories. "You were loud, especially when you started shouting about your wife. But you didn't hurt anyone." The weight of last night's events crashed down on me again, and I couldn't hold back a sigh. "I'm going through a tough time," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to let it all out like that." Tom's gaze softened with understanding. He leaned forward, his voice low and comforting. "I've been there, son. Lost someone I loved. Grief has a way of making you feel lost. But time, it has its own way of healing wounds." His words lingered in the air, their weight settling on my shoulders. He looked at me with a gentle intensity, as though trying to tell me that everything, even pain, eventually passed. "How about we eat something, huh?" Tom suggested, breaking the heavy silence. "Get that head of yours back to feeling right." I nodded, but before I could ask for water or coffee, the words slipped out in a pained whisper. "Something to drink for the headache." Tom chuckled as if he'd expected nothing less. He quickly got to work, and the aroma of simmering fish soup filled the air, making my stomach rumble despite the pain in my head. I watched as Tom worked with surprising dexterity for a man his age, skillfully preparing the meal. "Smells incredible," I commented, unable to hold back my admiration. Tom winked, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Old family recipe. Perfect for mornings like this." We ate together, the warmth of the soup soothing not just my body but something deeper, something that had been missing for a long time. As we sat under the open sky, the sun warming our backs, Tom shared some advice. "Alcohol, it's a hell of a thing. It can make you forget, but it can also keep you stuck in the past," he said, his eyes far away for a moment. "Life's complicated, son. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is let go. Move on, especially when someone's wronged you. But you have to be ready for that. You'll know when the time's right." His words, tinged with sadness, resonated deeply with me, but I didn't press further. It was clear there was a lot more behind those words. Instead, I thanked Tom for his wisdom and prepared to leave. Before I went, something caught my eye. Outside the shelter, on a small wooden bench, were intricately carved figures, animals, faces, abstract shapes. They were beautiful, full of life and detail. I turned to Tom, impressed. "Did you make these?" I asked, genuinely curious. Tom's face lit up. All of them. Woodworking's been a part of me for a long time. It brings peace, a way to hold on to parts of my life that matter." I admired his talent, and he beamed at the compliment. "It's what I do now," he added quietly. With that, I bid him farewell, my heart lighter than when I arrived. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe things could change. Maybe I could change. The next week, I returned to Tom's riverside shack, full of determination. I had been inspired by our conversation, and I was eager to dive into the new path I was setting for myself. As I approached the spot, though, a chill ran through me. Tom's shack was empty. His jacket and backpack were lying near the shelter, as though he had just stepped away. Confusion flooded my mind. Where was Tom? He couldn't have gone far. Maybe fishing, or out gathering wood. I scanned the surroundings, but there was no sign of him. Maybe he's just out for a while, I thought. I considered waiting until the next day, but then I felt something sharp dig into my foot. Looking down, I realized a stone had worked its way into my shoe. With a sigh, I sat down on a flat rock to remove it, but as I lifted my shoe, my eyes caught sight of something far more troubling. In the distance, a lone figure stood at the edge of the bridge, dangerously close to the drop below. My stomach dropped. Without a second thought, I rushed to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind screamed no as I sprinted toward the bridge, praying that I wasn't too late. "Tom!" I shouted, my voice desperate, willing him to turn back, to step away from the edge. My feet pounded against the wooden planks of the bridge, and as I drew closer, I saw Tom more clearly. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. There, beside him, was a coiled rope, a terrible symbol of despair that replaced my relief with gut-wrenching fear. Tom's face was etched with sorrow, his eyes filled with unshed tears. The weight of his pain was clear, even in the stillness of the moment. Without hesitation, I approached slowly, careful not to startle him. I reached out and gently placed an arm around his shoulders, pulling him back from the precipice. We stood together, two souls on that bridge, sharing a moment of raw vulnerability. I tightened my grip, feeling Tom's body tremble as the tears he had been holding back finally began to flow. I pulled him into a tight embrace, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. "It's okay," I murmured softly into Tom's ear, my voice steady and reassuring. "I'm here. We'll face this together." We sat side by side on the bridge, the sound of the river below soothing the silence. Slowly, Tom began to share his story, unraveling the threads of his life, piece by piece. His voice was heavy, laden with years of struggle and hardship. He started with his service to the country and the job he'd held at a food processing plant. It hadn't been glamorous work, he explained, but it was honest labor, something to be proud of. His voice carried a deep weariness as he spoke of securing a small apartment, of working tirelessly to provide for his daughter, the one thing in life that meant the most to him. The hardest part, Tom continued, rubbing his forehead, was when I lost my job. The plant downsized, and after missing a rent payment, they evicted me. One minute I had everything, and the next, I had nothing. His words were raw, filled with a pain I couldn't fully understand but could certainly feel. He paused, eyes distant, as though replaying those moments in his mind. I moved back to my hometown, hoping for a fresh start. But without a permanent address, I couldn't get a job. I was turned away from interviews. All I got were dead ends. Tom's hands fidgeted nervously as he spoke, the anguish in his eyes deepening. I ended up sleeping in places I shouldn't have, he continued, his voice breaking. I was picked up by the police a few times. I got sick. It just kept getting worse. I finally found a friend who let me sleep in his van, but that was just temporary, too. Eventually, I found the shack by the bridge. It's been my home ever since. He let out a deep sigh, shoulders slumping as the weight of the past bore down on him. The hardest part, Tom whispered, was knowing my daughter thought I'd abandoned her. I had nothing to offer her, no way to reach out to her. That's what broke me the most. My heart went out to Tom in that moment. This elderly man, with his gentle eyes and quiet strength, had endured more than anyone should ever have to. And yet, here he was, still standing, still fighting. As we made our way back to the shack, I spoke with warmth and sincerity. Tom, life's thrown some hard punches your way, but you're not alone anymore. I've got your back. We'll face this together. Tom looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and astonishment in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that there was hope. And in that moment, an idea began to form in my mind, a vision for something more. Tom had skills, talents that went untapped for far too long. I could see the possibility of building something together. I've got an idea, I said, my voice filled with conviction. How about we start a small furniture business? I've seen your work, what you can do with wood. We could begin by crafting cradles. What do you think? Tom's eyes widened in surprise. You want to partner with me? In a business? I nodded, my resolve firm. I wouldn't offer if I didn't trust you. Over the next 2 weeks, the garage at my house was filled with the sounds of sawing, hammering, and, more often than not, laughter. Tom and I worked together, side by side, crafting exquisite wooden cradles. Every piece carried with it not just skill but a story of fresh beginnings and second chances. As the cradles began to take shape, I felt something change in me, too. Tom wasn't just a friend now. He was family. We shared meals, stories, and dreams. There was a sense of belonging, a bond that deepened with each passing day. Soon, the cradles were ready. I loaded them into my truck and headed to the local furniture stores. The response was immediate. The cradle's intricate designs and expert craftsmanship caught the attention of the store owners. They couldn't get enough. One store owner, impressed by the craftsmanship, asked about the man behind the work. I couldn't help but feel pride swell in my chest as I spoke of Tom, his remarkable talent, and the story of our partnership. It didn't take long before demand grew. Word spread, and more stores reached out, eager to stock our cradles. Our small venture was growing faster than I had ever imagined. Then, one day, I saw my wife Laura's name flash on my smartphone. My heart skipped a beat as old memories flooded back. Memories of a time when things had been simpler, before everything fell apart. I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. We spoke briefly, and Laura mentioned a delay in her trip and the possibility of staying abroad for longer. I could sense something was off, but I didn't push. Then she hesitated before asking me for a loan. My chest tightened. It had been a long time since I'd heard from her, and the request felt like an echo of everything that had gone wrong between us. Laura, I said, my voice quiet but firm, I'm sorry, but I can't do that right now. Her response was sharp. Fine. Forget it. The call ended abruptly. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of frustration and sadness, but I knew that I had come too far to let the past pull me back. Meanwhile, Tom and I had been busy. Our small workspace had quickly outgrown the garage, and it was clear that we needed more space to meet the growing demand. I recalled a conversation with my friend Ethan, who owned an old barn just outside of town. It was sturdy, spacious, and had been vacant for years. We made the move, and with the additional space, our business began to expand even further. We hired a couple of eager local workers who were enthusiastic about learning the craft. It felt good to see our small business flourishing, to see people, young and old, coming together to create something beautiful. I began to oversee operations from my home office more frequently, which allowed me to balance the growing demands of the business with the time I still wanted to spend with Tom. One evening, after a long day at the barn, Tom came home to a pleasant surprise. When he walked in, he found me in the kitchen, an unusual sight for him, since we typically had simple dinners at the barn with the crew. "I thought you'd be at the barn," Tom said, looking surprised. I smiled, the warmth of the moment settling over me. "Tonight, I thought I'd make something special. We've got a lot to celebrate." Tom's face softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a true, unguarded smile on his face. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I guess we do." This evening was different. The table was neatly set, and the delicious aroma of dinner filled the air. Seeing Tom standing there, somewhat perplexed, I motioned for him to take a seat. "Please sit down, Tom. Dinner will be ready shortly," I said with a friendly smile. Tom, though clearly confused, complied and took a seat, watching me move about the kitchen with focused determination. Eventually, I joined him at the table, removing my apron. My face lit up with a wide grin, piquing Tom's curiosity. "I hope you won't be upset, Tom," I began, my eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. Before Tom could inquire further, the doorbell rang. I quickly answered it, and a moment later, a young girl hesitantly entered the room, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. A woman followed closely behind. Tom's face shifted from pale to flushed with emotion as he recognized his daughter, Sarah. He rose from his seat, stumbling slightly as he rushed toward her. They embraced tightly, their emotions needing no words to convey their feelings. Behind them, I stood with Sarah's daughter, Emily, smiling warmly at the heartwarming reunion. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke amidst her tears. "I thought I'd never see you again, Dad." Tom choked out an apology, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have reached out." In a soft, soothing tone, Sarah replied, "You should have, Dad, but it's okay now." She stroked his hair, trying to comfort him. Tom nodded, clinging to his daughter as though he were afraid she would vanish if he let go. Then he glanced at Emily and back at Sarah, his expression a mix of confusion and awe. Sarah laughed softly. "Yes, that's Emily," she said, and Tom gazed at his granddaughter with a mix of wonder and amazement. He had only seen her as an infant in pictures. I clapped my hands gently to draw their attention. "Well, everyone, dinner is ready. Please, come to the table." As they gathered around, Sarah began to share the struggles of the past month. Her search for her father had become an obsession, one that had strained her marriage and ultimately led to its collapse. "I lost so much in this journey," she confessed. "But now, with you here, Dad, and surrounded by people who care, it feels like I've found what I was searching for all along. Peace. Closure." The warmth in the room grew as Sarah and Emily's presence brought new energy into the house. Laughter filled the air, and I recognized the healing that was unfolding, not just for Tom, but for me as well. The house felt alive again. "I'm so glad you're both here," I said, smiling at them. "I'd like you to stay if you can. It will mean so much to Tom, and I think it'll help rebuild that lost bond between you." The next few weeks passed with a sense of harmony. The days at the barn continued to be busy, but the evenings were filled with the sound of laughter and the comfort of shared meals. It felt like a new chapter, one I hadn't known I was waiting for. One evening, while engrossed in paperwork in my home office, I heard the main door creak open. It wasn't Tom or Sarah. They always announced their return cheerfully. Glancing up, I saw Laura standing in the doorway, looking weary, her shoulders slumped, and dark circles under her eyes. She sighed heavily, dropped her bags, and stretched. "That trip was quite an experience," she said, her voice flat. I watched her in silence, a furrow forming on my forehead. There was something about her demeanor that felt distant, almost resigned. She walked past me and slumped on the living room sofa, every movement reflecting exhaustion. After a long pause, I took a deep breath and approached her. I hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her, maintaining a slight distance between us. Laura glanced at me, her eyes trying to gauge my reaction. "Look, James," she started, her voice soft but pleading. "I know things have been complicated, but—" I raised a hand to stop her, my voice low and steady. "Did you have your phone sync turned on?" I asked, my heart pounding. Laura looked puzzled, then realization crossed her face. Her eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I saw the pictures, Laura. I didn't need to see more than a few to understand." My throat tightened, the words difficult to get out. Desperation flickered in her eyes as she moved closer. "James, please listen. It's not how it seems. We were just—" I stood up abruptly, cutting her off. "I wish I hadn't seen those photos, Laura. But now that I have, things can never be the same. I can't. I won't pretend everything's okay." Laura's voice trembled as she pleaded, "James, just give me a chance to explain. Please." I shook my head, my decision firm. "I think it's best if you leave. Please." Her frustration escalated, her voice rising. "So this is it? You won't even hear me out? Fine, leave. But just remember, no one will ever stand by you the way I did. No one will love you like I did." The sound of the front door creaking open interrupted her tirade. Tom, having just entered, froze in the doorway. He could immediately sense the gravity of the situation, and with a quiet nod, he turned and retreated, giving us the privacy we needed. He gently closed the door behind him, leaving us alone. Laura's demeanor shifted, her earlier defiance melting away as she realized the weight of her actions. She sighed deeply, her voice small. "James, I'm truly sorry." While I acknowledged her apology, I remained resolute. "I think it's best if you leave now." As Laura exited, I glanced out the window and saw Emily playing in the yard, her innocent laughter ringing in the air. The sight of her joy, the carefree innocence of her embrace when she had rushed over to hug me earlier, felt like a stark contrast to the bitterness of my past with Laura. Laura, standing on the doorstep, watched the scene unfold, a pang of realization striking her. Perhaps, for the first time, she understood that someone else might offer me the love and respect I deserved, something she had been unable to give.